Welcome to Awakening Mindfulness at Work, a conversation that matters. I'm Pierre
And I'm Sarah Killeen. We are bringing to you conversations and practices to cultivate presence, calm, and balance in the workplace.
So let's begin right here, right now.
Hey, welcome everyone. I'm really delighted to be here for a new episode of this Awakening Mindfulness at Work podcast. Pierre, welcome to our podcast. for today's session, what's in store for us? What are we going to be speaking for the next 15 minutes?
Yeah, so a couple of weeks ago, we had our real-time gathering. And for those who may be listening to us for the first time, the real-time gathering is something we do the last week of the month. So the first 3 weeks, we release new episodes, podcast episodes. And then the fourth week, we have a Zoom gathering where we welcome everyone and we can have real conversations. So that's the idea. And then the topic this last time was creating your word for the new year and embracing new beginnings. So that was our topic. And we actually recorded that session and we released it on YouTube, so you can check it out there. So today's topic is related. It's letting go of what's no longer serving you in order to make room for what you want to create in the new year. So that's what I would like to touch on today. And I'm specifically referring to 3 areas where we might let go of things. So first, habits that may not be serving us. And then the second area is expectations. And then the third area, which we may get to today a little bit, but then I think we can schedule a whole episode on that one, letting go of to-do lists. How does that sound, Sarah? Letting go of to-do lists.
I think we could have one episode for each one of these ones, to be honest, rather than one episode for the 3. But we'll get started, and hopefully that's a conversation we'll keep having in New Year. I know it's a much needed one. Yeah.
Right.
Wonderful theme. Thank you for bringing that one.
Thank you. Okay, so I've written a list. Let's start with the first one first, which is the habits that we might want to let go of. So I've written a list, and based on a lot of the workshops, conversations, coaching sessions, and I think it's kind of pretty realistic list of things we might want to consider letting go of in terms of habits. And I would like to run it by you, Sarah, and see if, as you hear this list, if you can tell us 1 or 2 that resonate with you and why you think they resonate. And of course, alternatively, you can add your own to the list if you would like. So the list goes like this. And I'm going to encourage actually our listeners, our mindfulness friends, to also be writing down like what resonates with them. And it could be a nice way to reflect on what they might want to actually do. So first, saying yes when our energy or capacity says no. Second, filling every gap in the calendar instead of leaving spaces. Third, checking email or messages the moment we wake up. 4 is over-preparing, over-planning, or over-explaining. 5 is carrying old stories about ourselves that no longer reflect who we are or who we want to be. 6 is comparing ourselves to others. 7 is avoiding difficult conversations or delaying decisions. 8, reacting quickly rather than responding with presence. And there's 2 more. 9 is believing everything is urgent. And 10, putting our needs last to avoid disappointing others.
Wow. That's a very long list. Yeah, all of them resonate really. I think what's really important to remember in that context as well is when we talk about habits, a habit that is performed over time over a long period of time becomes who we are. So I just want also to acknowledge that those things, they might look like habits on paper, but it might be a lot more difficult actually to let go of them, because they are part of our identity. They are part of how we are feeling, who we are feeling we are in this world. um,
Mhm.
so that's a whole other topic about, how do you rebuild, and maybe that's the second part of this workshop as well, and we talked about that in the real time, is how do you build a new identity, as you let go of those old habits. One that stood out for me was, stopping to compare ourselves with others. And I would even add a little tweak to that, which is not comparing ourselves to the perfect version of ourselves. I think this is something that, we do very often, as perfectionism is can be a plague, and that would definitely be part of the list, and especially moral perfectionism, when we want to do everything right all the time, which can bring a lot of guilt. When we are obviously, we're humans, so we're not going to be able to do the right thing every single time. So how can we be in that moment still allow ourselves to be human, and not to be morally perfect? So I think perfectionism is one that would fit there, and it's also related to the one that you mentioned about comparing ourselves to others, where suddenly we put others on a pedestal because they might be further ahead on the journey, or they might be doing things slightly different, but also their life might be very different than ours, circumstances might be very different. We are all on a very unique journey, and some people that might be looking like they're way ahead of us might not be, and in some other areas they might be a lot behind us. So in
Mhm.
that sense, staying in our lane and focusing on what we can do. So which version of ourselves is showing up today? Which parts of ourselves are we bringing to the table today, and which ones we might not want to invite to the table anymore, or which new parts of ourselves do we want to bring to the table, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes. Thank you for this insight on the comparison topic. And yeah, comparison is very limited thinking. It's not looking at the full picture. And if we realize this, they can help us soften it and not get too entangled in it.
Hmm.
Thank you. So moving to our second list. Oh, go ahead. You had something
No,
to
this
add.
made me think of something you say a few times, which is, I think, when that the saying is, the grass is always greener somewhere else. And I think you mentioned at some point that version of the saying, which was, the grass is greener where you water it, or something similar, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's very relevant in that conversation. Is sometimes we're so focused out, looking outside and looking at all the ways we could be and all the things we could be doing, and those versions that of those versions of humans we might be in a parallel universe. And then all the time and the energy that we're spending doing that is time and energy that we're not investing in our own, self-worth and self-growth.
Yeah. Yeah. What a big trade off. Yeah.
I know. and
Okay.
and and
So,
also, I'll just add something there as well, because you
mhm,
mentioned as well, um we have to talk about addiction here as well. So addiction can come up in all kinds of forms, and some of the topics you have on
mhm,
your list are actually very linked to addiction, where we are
mhm,
living nowadays, in a world that is pretty much tempting us with all kinds of addictions on a daily basis, especially with
mhm,
technology. Think about social media. I mean, there's so many platforms and consup objects to consume we can get addicted to, that are
mhm,
also rooted in that kind of, trying to numb the fact that we are disconnected from ourselves, living, far away from nature, from many of us, working too hard or too much, working through our to-do lists instead of taking time to rest, all those things. And so addictions are, I think, one key area that could be added to the list. Some of the items on your list are already, I think, are touching that topic, but maybe
mhm,
asking,
mhm.
asking also yourselves, listeners, and that's definitely something I do every year, is where are the hidden addictions in my life? They might not be
Yeah.
as obvious as some addictions could be, but they're definitely there. They can be mild, they can be, so being very honest with ourselves, and it's not about letting ourselves off the hook, but also having that compassion with ourselves, because addiction is, it's painful as well.
Mhm,
So I would
mhm,
definitely put that on the list, that reflection around addictions. What are the addictions in my life? Some might be very subtle, some might be pretty obvious,
mhm,
and
mhm.
yeah, that might be something
Yeah.
we want to let go of in the new year.
Mhm, mhm. And that brought to mind a book I'm going to mention before I quickly move to the second aspect that I mentioned earlier, which is expectations.
Mhm.
So the book I want to mention is called Dopamine Nation: Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence. It's by Dr. Anna Lemke. So this can really be a nice additional resource. So now moving to the expectations. So this is the list, that things we might want to let go of. So the expectation to have everything figured out, the expectation that growth should be easy and feel comfortable, the expectations that our body should look or feel or perform a certain way, the expectations that the people we love should behave the way we want them to, the expectations that difficult people should not be difficult, the expectations that we must live up to other people's views, judgments, or preconceived ideas about us, the expectations that we ourselves should be different and that we must meet our own self imposed demands. And then just a couple more, the expectations that the past should have been different and the future should be a certain way. And then finally, and very related to our journey, the expectations that our mindfulness practice should feel a certain way.
Again, I think we could spend a whole episode on every one of these. Expectations are, yeah, interestingly, it's one thing that we can have control over, right? We choose what we expect in one way or another. If we if,
Mm,
if we right if we
mm,
bring them to consciousness, expectations are something we can work with, maybe a little bit more easily than some very ingrained patterns, or habits that are also very, yeah, somatically ingrained, I'd say. So
mm,
expectations are, I think it's very it's very uplifting, actually, to think about those expectations we can let go of, because we can replace them with, newer, more constructive expectations. And
yeah,
this is very related as well to mindsets. So I'd say, expectations you let go of, but also mindsets that you want to let go of. The way you look at the world,
yeah,
and what you expect the world and life and people around you to give you, which are then expectations. But yeah, mindsets, worldviews, expectations would be in that category of things we have maybe a little more control over than the first list
yeah,
we discussed.
yeah. And I really liked what you hit on, which is replacing the expectations by something. And I think sometimes what this brings to mind is that sometimes the replacing is a slight tweak. It doesn't have to be throwing away the expectations completely, but it's softening it. Look, expecting that the people I love would, behave in a certain way. So we can shift that from, it would be nice if they behave in ways that relate to my values and preferences and so forth. But if they don't, that's okay, and we can navigate
Mm.
through that in ways that are productive. So it's a slight tweak sometimes, as opposed to thinking we have to throw all expectations out.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to mention in the context of this whole episode when we're talking about things to let go of is this is the first step maybe in a self-reflection process. But if instead of just thinking about getting rid of things, we are at the same time thinking about nourishing our minds and our bodies and our hearts with more, supportive and constructive habits and expectations,
Mhm.
um
Mhm.
then it's a much softer way to go into it. And it's
Yeah.
something that has been shown by research as well to be a lot more effective instead of just thinking about getting rid and omitting. It's like when you're trying to heal yourself through food. If you're just obsessed with things that you need to remove from your meals and your plates, it's going to feel very restrictive. If instead you ask yourself, what will really nourish me, what will really support me, what will I really need to be the best version of myself in the workplace, at home, then it's a lot more expensive. It's a lot more uplifting as a process.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes. And for our third area that I mentioned earlier, um, definitely an episode soon dedicated to that will make sense. But for now, I'll just throw in briefly, knowing we're about at time, briefly what that topic is, and that is that getting rid or yeah, letting go of to-do list. That's a pretty interesting topic to consider. Like, are we serving the to-do list or is the to-do list serving us? And how can we, and there are some practical way to work through this. So this is not just philosophical, like, oh, to-do lists are, restricting me and I'm just going to get rid of them. It doesn't work that way. It's much more involved, and it opens up the room for a lot of nice
Mm.
reflections and specific things you may consider to do. I think we have a few things from our workshops, practices that many people are benefiting from that would like to share on the
Mm.
podcast, different
Mm.
episode.
Also, what's interesting is that we tend sometimes to give our to-do list a life on their own, right? They're this almost this being, this thing that operates on its own, and we forget that we created the to-do list in the first place. So yes, more to discuss
Yeah.
in another episode. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
all this. I think they're wonderful cues, for self-reflection as we go into
Mhm.
the new year. And they are, of course, just the beginning. They're the start, um, of that, building that version of ourselves that can thrive maybe a little bit more than the year before. But they're
Mhm.
really great beginning. So yeah, thanks for sharing.
And knowing this episode will be released on New Year's Day, Happy New Year, everyone.
Have a great year.